Hey, Carol, are you feeling a bit jet lagged after daylight saving time ended?
Dee, I am. I got up early yesterday. I was on top of everything. I felt like the day was going on and on and on. And I'd think, oh, it's this time. And it was like an hour earlier. And then I hit the proverbial wall at 8 p.m. and I was done. Done.
Yeah, I ended up staying up till midnight. But I bet you're wondering, how does daylight saving time relate to gardening? Because everything relates to gardening.
Everything does relate to gardening. And so I don't know how it relates other than I guess in the summertime, gardeners have more time to spend outside and in the evening after they've worked.
Well, actually, everybody thinks that and by the way, it's daylight saving time, not savings, although that's what everyone says. Everybody thinks it was Benjamin Franklin who suggested it. It was not. It was actually suggested by an entomologist from New Zealand in 1895, and his name was George Vernon Hudson.
I do not know why an entomologist thinks that daylight saving time is a great idea.
Well, because he thought that bugs would be easier to catch in his nets if he could stay out longer. But he wanted to spring ahead 2 hours and fall back
Which is
2 hours.
Extremely crazy.
Yikes.
And here's what I have to say to George Vernon Hudson. Just get up earlier and do your bug catching,
No
or
kidding.
just set up a passive catcher that catches them for you. For heaven's sake. Anyway, I'm glad he didn't get the 2 hours. 1 hour is bad enough. And now that's enough of that. We are back on our game. Day 2 of daylight saving time. Are we saving time now, or is it I don't remember.
We were saving time. We're not saving time now. We're on normal time.
And yet the day is still 24 hours long. Let's get started. Welcome to the Garden Angelist, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana, where I have a suburban garden measured in square feet. It's about a third of an acre.
And I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma, where I garden on several acres out in the country. Too many.
We call ourselves Garden Angelists because we are evangelists for gardening. We love gardening and we want others to love it too.
Yes, we do, and we aren't afraid to spill the beans and tell all of our gardening secrets, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. But that's enough of who, what, when, where. Let's move on to this week's episode. Hello, Carol.
Hello, Dee. Guess what this is?
This is a podcast.
But this is the first episode of our 5th season.
Wow. So we've done 4 seasons at 52 episodes a year because we do one every week. We always drop it on the same day. Go us.
Go us. So, and we had a few special ones in there. So, if you do the higher math, it's over 200 episodes, Dee.
I'm impressed.
Thank you.
Now, give me your garden update.
So my garden update is I did take advantage of getting up earlier yesterday, and I got a lot done in the garden. Mostly I got all my bulbs planted. I dug a new flower bed around my mailbox post and put some stones around it. So bulbs in the ground, let the snow come.
Okay. And didn't you also do a bunch of garden cleanup?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I cut back my peonies, which in
And
Indiana.
explain to people why you cut back your peonies early, because you don't want to spread botrytis around your garden.
Yeah, they're all ate up, as they say, with botrytis and powdery mildew and stuff. And so those go into the trash. I cut them back, and you're supposed to cut them back as close to the ground as you can. So that is done. And I cut back a few other things that I don't think insects are living in my big.
Like your lilies.
No, they're not living in those. Mowed up a bunch of leaves. I didn't mow them up. I mulched them in place, but we'll talk about that later. And, by the way, I forgot to mention, I did get that report back from Purdue University about my spruce tree.
Yep.
So it is a combination of, as I suspected, drought and a little bit of a plant disease. But I think the plant disease probably is always there. So they have given me the very sound advice of monitor until spring, which I shall do.
And water more next summer if you're in a drought.
That is probably a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And
I lost a tree. I forgot to tell you that, but I lost a small, it wasn't a spruce tree, but it was another type of evergreen. And it was just in a place I didn't see, and I didn't get enough water on it. It died.
Well, interesting story about that. So in the neighborhood easement, about, I think it was 3 years ago, we planted a new pine tree up there because some kids got in an accident and basically plowed through our common area and knocked down a big tree. They both walked away because they were so drunk. But anyway, another story for another day. We planted a pine tree there about 3 years ago, and earlier this summer I was walking by and it's like, oh, it's dead. I mean, and yeah, we didn't give it a ton of water, but it got through 3 seasons and then just up and died. So I went down there and cut it off. I cut it off and hauled it away for the neighborhood. I couldn't figure that out. But anyway, the other thing is I'm doing the microgreens again, Dee. I know you're like rolling your eyes.
I am not rolling my eyes.
Oh, okay. But anyway, I harvested a bunch, and now I'm starting a crop rotation for winter so that I'll have fresh microgreens throughout the winter. I'm very excited about it. How about your garden?
All of my bulbs came. I ordered a lot more bulbs than I thought I did, which is what always happens to me.
So wait, Dee, how many did you order?
I don't know, but it's more than one box.
More than one box, people. That Dee. I only had 2 boxes.
I probably have 4. But I woke up this morning and I thought about, where am I going to put all those daffodil bulbs? And then I remembered that I'm going to plant them up in my trees so that I see them from my front door.
Perfect.
It'll be pretty. And then my credit card's smoking, so my 2 seed order. Oh, and I won't plant my bulbs until about Thanksgiving for people who live in this area. My 2 seed orders came in too because I went and did some zinnia seed ordering because I was a little concerned that there wouldn't be enough zinnia seeds for me. So I went and ordered some zinnias and a few other things, but not much. And I'm going to start those inside. And then I cleaned out the raised cut flower beds, the raised beds out there. I've decided I'm going to plan out the space this year better than I have in previous years. I'm actually going to draw what I'm going to plant.
You're going to draw a design? How exciting.
It's not really a design. It's literally keeping track of what I'm planting where. But that's fine. And then, let's see, I'll talk about that more in the garden commissions. And yeah, that's what I did. So.
Oh, that sounds pretty good. So let's move on, and I will do a quote and take us into our first topic.
Okay.
I've discovered that every time I've reached a milestone, I think I'm there. But there's another there waiting for me. Sarah Benincasa. I can't remember. Benincasa.
Yeah, we don't know who she is, but we like the quote.
That is a good quote.
Flowers. We're going to talk about orchids. And we want to say thank you to all of our listeners because they've been sending us a lot of interesting questions, and we're going to try to address them on the podcast. Because as much as we'd like to answer every single question people send us, we would not have time and also be able to garden and put on a podcast. So,
true that.
So we're going to start with orchids. We've been asked about orchids. So the most common orchid that you can find in the stores is Phalaenopsis. And I've talked about this once before when we talked about orchids. And it was when I was in for California Spring Trials. We were at this place to look at annuals, but we realized there was this big greenhouse. And we said, can we come in here? And they said, sure. And it was a full orchid, Phalaenopsis orchid factory.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. It was fascinating. They started with them tiny, just tiny. And then they would pot them up. And then eventually you get your orchids in the store. I can say truthfully that if you want to, orchids are like the most non-live plant of live plants, in my opinion, because they bloom forever. You know what I mean? And they're not hard to grow, and you can bring them my big thing was how to get them to rebloom, and that's not hard. People think it's hard, but it's not. Which part should we talk about first? You can have them in they can be in the center of the house while they're blooming. They don't need much sunlight. They're just happy to be there. But if you want them to rebloom, you have to stick them in the window. They have to be 10 degrees cooler at night than they are in the daytime.
Right.
And so where I live, that works out year round, because in the summer, if you put them by the window, it's hot, like an east facing window or a west facing window. I would not put them in a south window. I think that might be too hard on them. What do you think?
I think that's right. And Phalaenopsis, if you kind of think about that one, I don't know if it's a rule, but guideline is like lower the temperature 10 degrees at night for that thing, give it some light, and it will put out a new bloom. And I took care of one for my old neighbor who was going back and forth between New York and Indianapolis. And it had a bloom stalk on it when I got it. It was glorious. And you're right, that bloom lasted at least
Forever.
6 weeks. At least 6 weeks.
A long, long time.
And then I followed that rule, and about a year later, I had another bloom stalk, and it bloomed again, and it was beautiful. Great big white.
Yeah, I will say this. I think the white ones are the easiest to rebloom. I think this is just from personal experience, because I grow a lot of these. And the white ones rebloom faster than anything else, but they're still really slow. So don't give up on your orchid, and it's okay to feed them too. You can feed them with a foliar fertilizer, a liquid fertilizer. There's a lot of things you can do. But they're not as hard as people make them sound.
They aren't.
I used to think, oh gosh, I'm going to have to reduce my temperature in my house 10 degrees. No, just stick them in a window and cut off that bloom stalk and make sure that they're getting, and if you've bought it from the store and you want it to rebloom and you haven't repotted it, it would probably be a really good idea to repot it, because they put them in these little plastic cups that they slit down the sides. And so even if it looks like it's in a big, beautiful pot, it's not. It's probably in one of those little plastic cups. So you want to pull them out of there so that the roots can get some air, because I want to make sure I have this right. Are they epiphytes? Is that what they are?
So the answer to the question, these are actually epiphytes, but they...
Okay.
The thing you were thinking of is parasite or parasitic.
Right, they're not parasites.
No.
They're epiphytes.
Yes.
Which means they don't do anything to trees or anything else. They just sit in them. And they get, rainfall that comes through the leaves of the trees. So that's Phalaenopsis orchids, which are the most common ones. And we briefly wanted to mention Cattleyas.
But before you go there,
okay.
Let me tell you, you talked about the Phalaenopsis being like the most unlive plant because it lasts forever in bloom. Mm-hmm. So at Costco, they had some Phalaenopsis orchids that really looked nice. And I thought, they were fake, but they were the most real thing I had ever seen in a fake plant. And
that's crazy.
A few days later, I read that Marianne Wilburn, who we know, wrote on Garden Rant about seeing these at Costco, and she was almost fooled into thinking that's the real deal. So if
she's fooled, we're all in trouble.
Yeah. So that's one thing you have to know about these. The other thing is, if you see one at the store and it's a real bright blue or bright purple,
yuck.
It's been dyed that color, and it's probably just a plain old white one when you rebloom it. So, to me, those look hideous. They're like succulents that have been spray painted and have sparkles all over them, which I saw that at the store the other day. Why are we putting glitter on succulents? Anyway, I just wanted to say those really bright colored ones are fake colored. Real plant, fake colored.
Well, they look fake.
Versus the fake ones that look real at the Costco.
That's bizarre. I thought of something else when you were talking about that. What was it? I don't understand why they would make fake ones, because they're almost fake just growing them. So
because it's perpetually in bloom. It's always in bloom.
Well, I mean, I know what else I wanted to say. They're perpetually in bloom anyway, pretty much, if you have more than one. So, what? People don't have more than one?
No, people don't have more than one. I only have one at the moment.
I have 6 or 7 right now.
Way to go, Dee.
And periodically, guys, I just throw them away because they're really cheap. And you can find them. I was going to say where I found them cheapest. Trader Joe's. That's what I was going to tell
Trader
people.
Joe's.
Trader Joe's always has them for anywhere from $13 to, $17. And the $17 ones are usually multiple plants. So you should buy yourself an orchid today because they're fun.
They're fun. Another orchid that I have that I grow, and we're going to talk about one we're not going to grow in a minute, is the jewel orchid, which is actually
I've
purchased.
never grown those.
You'll find them usually in January in the stores, and the foliage is usually a maroon with a pink striping through it, and the
Yes.
flowers are white. I don't want to say they're inconsequential, but they're nothing to write home about. But you grow it because of the beautiful foliage, and that's the jewel orchids.
Oh, I'm looking at them right now. Yes, they are beautiful. And they do have very small blooms. And they almost look like Tradescantia a little bit.
Almost. But they are...
Yeah, has that kind of a look.
I have one growing behind me that's tiny. They're very resilient. I almost killed this thing from neglect. And so I put it in here where I am more often so that I can see it and remember that it probably needs
to water it.
Yeah, it needs more water than I was giving it.
That would be our top houseplant tip of the day. Put things where you see them.
Yes. So
Maybe
then
that's
you
just
remember.
our top plant tip of the day, because then you'll remember to water them.
Yeah.
Because I'm notorious. In fact, I water all my plants, my house plants, on Sunday afternoon after I get home from church, because I just tell myself that's the day I do them.
And that's the best advice. Set up a day that you're like, this is the day I water houseplants. Unless it's one that doesn't, like a snake plant, doesn't need hot watering every single week. But yes, a set day and time.
And I don't water every week. I go around and check them all and make sure that, check to see if they're really dried out. And in the winter, they do need that because of the heat being on. In the summer, not so much. Like I said last week, I neglect them in the summer. But in the winter, I almost water them every week unless it's just, and I don't own any mother-in-law's tongue. I don't.
I know.
My daughter does.
You don't like it.
I don't. I think they're ugly. Okay, so let's talk about cattleyas. So cattleya orchids are the ones that people wear as corsages. They were really popular when we were young.
They were popular in the 40s, Dee, way before we were even born. I think about these people that dress in vintage clothing, like they always dress in the 40s, and there's some of them on Instagram that show up every once in a while on my feed. That's who I think of as wearing a cattleya orchid.
See, I always equate them with Mother's Day because when I was a Methodist, I'm a convert. Back when I was a Methodist, it was very, very popular to wear an orchid for your mother, and you wore it right side up if she was alive, and you wore it upside down if she had passed, and that way people just instantly knew if you had your mother still living here on earth or not. And so I just always thought it was the most beautiful thing, and so even after I became Catholic, I wore a cattleya orchid on Mother's Day, and no one else did.
Yeah. Well, my aunt talked about it.
It doesn't appear to be a Catholic thing. It appears to be like a Protestant thing, or maybe we have listeners who are all different faiths. Maybe they can tell us.
Yeah. My aunt said that back when she was a kid, and I think they went to a Methodist church, they wore a red rose if your mother was alive, and a white rose if your mother had passed. And that way they would know on Mother's Day.
That's really beautiful. We should bring that back.
We should.
I think it's a lovely,
there are a lot of old things we should bring
thing.
Back.
Yeah. Not going there.
Not going there.
Not today.
Have we talked about orchids enough, Dee?
I think we have. Shall I do the next quote?
Please do.
Autumn carries more gold in its pocket than all the other seasons. Jim Bishop.
That is lovely.
So true. I posted a little slideshow on Instagram last night, and it was just my walk around the property. It was just all the beautiful foliage. And yes, there was a lot of gold. So now under vegetables, we're going to talk about cold frames versus hot boxes versus greenhouses. Do you want to go first?
Well, I don't have much to say. I have neither a greenhouse nor a hot box nor a cold frame. And whenever I think about, maybe I should put in a cold frame, I always just sort of say, that seems like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work unless you want to grow greens, or if you want to start seeds before it's time to start seeds. So sometimes I actually put my, first let's define what it is. I actually have a Family Handyman article called What is a Cold Frame Greenhouse? And this is an example where I didn't like the title. I'm just going to be honest. And I made them change the first paragraph because you can't, there's no such thing as a cold frame greenhouse. But that's an example of the algorithm because that's what people were searching for. So that's why it's like that.
Now I have a story of one. I have a story of one.
Cold frame greenhouse?
Sorta, kind of.
There is no such thing, but go ahead.
So when I was in high school, I think it was, they tore down my elementary school that was from 1902. And my dad got some of the old windows, which had been changed from glass to plexiglass along the way. So we had these huge, big wooden frames with plexiglass. And he used them to make a cold frame. But what he did was he put it up against the house over the basement window wells. And so if he wanted to add a little heat to the cold frame, he could open up the basement windows and some of the heat from the basement would go in and heat up his cold frame, which I thought was rather ingenious on his part.
It is ingenious. And you know what they would call that? A hot box.
Oh, well, then I've jumped ahead. I apologize.
No, I like it. I think it's ingenious, and that's a great way to get heat to a cold frame. When you get heat to a cold frame, it becomes a hot box. And then, of course, greenhouses are defined as also being heated. Cold frames are not heated, technically.
Except by the sun.
Right. It's a natural heat from the sun, solarization. But I'm talking about additional heat that you provide. So it can't technically be a greenhouse, but that's fine. The article's quite good, and I learned more than I ever wanted to know about cold frames, greenhouses, and hot boxes when I wrote this article. So cold frames, which is what I have, and I also have a greenhouse. I do not have a hot box. Cold frames are only heated by the sun, and they have an open bottom. That's just the fact of it. That's all they are.
And when you say open bottom, it means that they are sitting on the ground. There's nothing between the ground and the ground is the bottom.
Right. Or in my case, it's my driveway. So, they sit on my old driveway. But yes, most often they are open to either concrete or bare ground because usually they're right next to a greenhouse. And why would people do that?
Radiant heat coming up from the ground helps to warm that up.
And being next to a greenhouse is heated, and so they get some heat from that too. And you see them all the time in England. So I have 2 cold frames. They work great for lots of stuff, but I don't think they're necessary unless you want to be able to. It depends on where you live. And if you want to harvest leafy greens or onions or something like that all winter long, they're really good. Because honestly, they will hold a crop really well.
Right.
Like you start the leafy greens in the fall and they hold the crop all winter because when there's no sunlight, when we get close to the winter solstice, that crop is just hanging there. But if you put that same crop in a greenhouse, you would have to harvest it because it's too warm and it'll cause it to bolt or get too long or taste bad. So that's it. I also have I think it's a really good post about my greenhouse and how to do one on my blog.
That is interesting. And I've thought about putting a cold frame over part of my raised bed vegetable garden, but then I go, that's a lot of work. I've also thought about doing the hoops and putting like the horticulture cloth over it, which that I might end up doing that if I want to successfully grow cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. Because it would keep out those butterflies.
Right, because mine ate everything I had.
That's right.
I mean, this cabbage moths ate everything. I was like, wow, I've never had them decimated quite that bad. But it was warm and, they were still around and they were happy. I found a cabbage moth caterpillar on a coleus in my greenhouse yesterday.
So have we convinced anybody
what are you doing in here?
To put in a cold frame? Or are we just educated?
I think we just educated on this deal. I have no opinion. I think if you want to have one, great, go for it. I mean, I like mine. I don't use them all the time, but I do start stuff early. Oh, I was going to say that about sweet peas. I often put my sweet peas in my cold frames, which is not really what traditionally they're for, but they help get them started early enough so that I can have sweet peas because it gets hot here so early and The times I've tried to just plant them in the fall, it just hasn't worked here. And I don't know if it just was too cold that winter. I don't know. So you have a quote. I'm done talking about these.
All right, I have a quote, and then I have a book for you.
Cool.
It looked like the world was covered in a cobbler crust of brown sugar and cinnamon. Sarah Addison Allen.
I like it. And your book, it kind of fits with that.
It does, covered, because the book I have today is a new book out from Timber Press. It's called The Complete Book of Ground Covers by Gary Lewis. Mm-hmm. And Dee, did you ever wonder if ground covers should be spelled as one word or two words?
Well, you know I have, because obviously from, writing, we write about ground covers, and I've seen it written both ways.
Well, Gary does it as two words, and from here forth, it is two words to me. This guy knows his ground covers. Oh my gosh. So this is not your average gardening book. This is a reference guide. It's 452 pages and lists 4,000 ground cover plants, or I should say plants that can be ground covers. And I would quote from him. He says, "Nevertheless, these small but tough and useful plants punch above their weight, so to speak. And like Napoleon or Tinkerbell or Frodo, ground covers are small but mighty and deserve a little respect." I gotta respect a garden writer who uses Napoleon, Tinkerbell, and Frodo in the same sentence.
About plants.
About plants.
That's the best part of all.
That is.
I like it because you know what? That's just impressive. And I love Frodo.
Yes.
I like Tinkerbell too. I don't like Napoleon so much. Okay.
So in the introduction, he has the types of ground covers. They can be running plants, suckering plants, trailing plants, creeping plants, clumping plants, self-seeding plants, probably several others that I didn't list. So it kind of covers those basics. And then he talks a little bit about how to select, care, maintain, and propagate. And then comes a list of those that are resistant to deer and rabbits. And then 4,000 ground covers A to Z. It is going to take me all winter to read through this and re-educate myself about ground covers, because here's a little known fact about me. When I was at Purdue, you had to get a practical experience in horticulture. Uh-huh. So I worked at a place called Ground Cover Specialist in Little Waldron, Indiana, where we propagated ground cover all summer long.
Oh, that sounds miserable, but okay.
Well, it was hot sometimes and you got really dirty, but I've always had this bored. This love of ground covers. And I know some people don't like ground covers.
Oh, I love them.
I love ground covers. Anyway, Timber Press sent me this as a review copy. I think it's around $50. But if you really want to educate yourself on ground covers, this is the book for that. And I heard it took Gary close to 8 years to write this book.
That's what I was going to ask you, because I remembered you telling me about it, that it took him how could it not take a really long time?
Yeah. And Timber Press, if you look at the books they're putting out today, and they used to put out books, like they have a whole book of clematis that I have, which is great, and a book about hellebores. And so those single genus books, or that whole, I guess, genre of types of books.
Michael Durr on trees, things like that.
You just don't see those as often. And so when this came out, I'm like, I got to have this. And Dee, this is going to, and there are things that I have growing that I think about as ground cover, but they really are ground cover. Because as they grow and expand, like my heucheras, my hellebores, my epimediums, I don't have to mulch those areas. They're covered by plants.
They shade the ground below.
And I don't have to weed much in them either, which is another benefit.
Another happy thing, right?
Yes.
And then I noticed that there are some violets listed.
Yes. Well, whenever I get a book about plants, Dee, whether it's a book of wildflowers or whatever, I always go right to the index and look up viola. And there are several that I knew about, most of these that are listed as being good ground covers. And so I'll probably try to reestablish some of these in my own garden. So anyway, The Complete Book of Ground Covers by Gary Lewis. If you really want to know your ground covers, and I do, this is the book for you.
Cool. Shall I do the next quote?
Please do.
I cannot endure to waste anything so precious as autumnal sunshine by staying in the house. Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Yo, howdy. You're not kidding about that. Got to get outside
Yeah,
while the
go
sun...
soak it up.
Yeah, because I got about a week and then it's going to get cold. But anyway, 2 pieces of dirt.
Yes, 2 good pieces of dirt. You do the first one.
So the first one is pretty simple. They are calling for volunteers in Great Britain, so I don't think I'm qualified. But they're going to geomap all the old nurseries in Great Britain, even the ones that aren't there, and come up with like this digital directory of where all these great nurseries and little greenhouses selling interesting little plants were. And I thought, why? I wish somebody would do that in the United States, because I know just north and west of me is a place called Bluff Road, and up and down that whole road were all kinds of greenhouses and different growers and stuff. And it's down to almost one.
Nothing.
And
Yeah,
so
we
to
only have a
know the
few.
history of all that, and to geomap like even the state of Indiana or the state of Oklahoma. But I doubt anybody does that. But we will link to this, and maybe we have a listener too in Great Britain thinks, yeah, I think I would like to volunteer, because you can do it virtually from home.
That's cool. So our second piece of dirt we feel like we have to address. Oh my gosh, I'm so sick of this campaign. It's the Leave the Leaves campaign. Now all of our listeners just gasped that I said I'm sick of this campaign. I think this campaign is so irritating because it is an oversimplification of leaving the leaves.
It is.
And it makes me angry because it fools gardeners into thinking that you just leave the leaves. And I actually have gotten chastised before because we take the leaves off of our grass because we have oak leaves and they smother turf grasses. Not Bermuda, but other turf grasses. And even Bermuda, if they get in there thick enough, the sunlight can't get to the grass. And if the sunlight can't get to the grass dies off. Okay?
That is true.
That's just the simple facts. So one time I posted on Facebook that my son was out sweeping up the leaves on our grass. And I had this guy just take me to task about all the little insects in the leaves. Totally agreed with him. I finally had to say to him, because he just kept firing back, I finally said, do you not realize that I was like, I leave all the leaves in all these places under the trees, and that's fine. But if you leave them just in your beds, and at my house, they get, a good 8 inches.
Oh, yeah.
Thick, because I live in the country. And so I live in a wooded area of Oklahoma. Yes, there is such a thing. And so if I leave all those leaves in my front garden beds and don't shred them, they will not make it. What I like to do is take them and sweep them up and shred them and then put them back on the garden. And so he said to me, well, but that'll kill the little bugs, like the lightning bugs. And I was like, well, it hasn't so far because we have 1 billion lightning bugs. But we also leave the leaves out in the forested areas. We just can't have them on the grass.
Yeah.
Or in my garden
And
beds.
in my
All of
garden,
them.
I'll leave leaves in the flower beds and stuff, but sometimes in the spring I do have to pull them off as new growth is coming up. And I mulch my leaves into the lawn. And so, shame on me, I guess, because if you read the information, they're like, oh, don't chop up your leaves because you're going to kill all those little insects. And I'm like, I don't think I'm killing that many insects.
Well, and not only that, it's just disingenuous because, okay, maple leaves, those decompose just fine. Certain leaves decompose really well.
Yes.
Other leaves just do not. And oak leaves, our native oak trees in Oklahoma, do not decompose. You're welcome to leave them all winter long, but you're going to have to do something about them in spring because they just mat down. So I don't believe in bagging leaves. I don't think that you should put them at the curb. I think that's bad. Just chop them up and mulch them and stick them on your beds, or leave them in the wintertime and pull them out and mulch them, or do what Carol does. I mean, I'm all for the leaves because I love leaf mold. Leaf mold is fabulous stuff.
It is.
I can't just leave them though. It doesn't work.
No.
And then, the other thing is, so we're going to link to a deal on NPR that actually has really good source material. They interviewed several different botanists and, they talked about what you need to do with leaves. And then also the Xerces Society has a link if you want to dig deeper into this topic, and it's called Winter Habitat Protection from the Xerces Society. So you're welcome to leave your leaves this fall, except on your turf grass, like if you want to just leave them in your shaded beds. For the insects. I'm all for the insects. Everybody knows I love the insects.
Yes. Now somebody's going to come back and say, well, if you got rid of all your turf grass, you wouldn't have to worry about it. And let's move on.
Okay. I just have a tiny amount of turf grass. Let's move on. You do the quote.
I love the autumn, that melancholy season that suits memories so well. Gustave Flaubert.
So this is our rabbit hole. We have a joint rabbit hole.
Yeah, because I was moseying along, looking at some lost ladies of garden writing. That was going to be my rabbit hole. And then you did the virtual poke on the shoulder and say, hey, Carol, looky over here. And I'm like, okay.
Oh my gosh, it was so fascinating, right?
It was.
It got started because I actually watched a podcast, which was on YouTube. And it was with it was actually Will Harris. And he is a very famous fourth generation Georgia rancher and farmer who is a big believer in, it's so complicated, in regenerative farming. I am fascinated by regenerative farming. Fascinated. This is an extremely deep rabbit hole because it has to do with Alan Savory. And Alan Savory is a South African, isn't he South African?
Yes. No, Zimbabwe.
No. Zimbabwe, sorry, not South African. He's from Zimbabwe and he's a farmer. And his point, at least what I think so far, is that we not only need to leave areas of the earth unplowed.
Yes.
We need to graze animals on it.
Yes. And that was the surprising part for me was the impact that grazing animals had in a positive way on the various environments where they've studied it. And they showed some, if you delve further, then there's videos showing in Africa where they had tried to preserve land by removing everything from it. And he talked about, like shooting elephants, which are a grazing animal, reducing elephant populations because they thought that was impacting the environment negatively. And yet the environment just got worse and worse and worse. And they realized, no. The elephants grazing and living on the land actually helps improve the land. And he just felt sick, he said, when he realized what they had done.
Right, because part of it is that, I went and found a link for our team, which is, so Will Harris is a fourth generation cattleman, and he owns something called White Oak Pastures, which has stayed in his family since 1866, okay? And he is part of the University of Georgia's School of Agriculture. So there's a lot of negativity out there about grazing animals. And the buffalo and I'm trying to find your face. Okay, I'm trying to get back to your Zoom. Buffalo are one of the animals or groups of animals who made a real difference in the Great American Prairie. And one of the most fascinating parts about this for me in watching Savory's talk was when he showed land that he calls decertification. And decertification is land that has gone back to desert. And the middle part of the United States, which is the Great American Prairie, is part of that land that has been decertified. If anybody wants to look at this further, we're going to link to Will Harris, and we're also going to link to Dr. Jason Roundtree, because he is is it Michigan State University?
I believe so, yes.
Is that right? Yeah. He is also someone who talks about regenerative farming, and that's what all of this is about. And the idea is not just hedgerows. And I remember this from the sheep farmer guy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, he talked about how you absolutely have to have sheep, and then you move them around. And it also goes back to the farm, The Biggest Little Farm, which was another video that we talked about, a movie. And it's a fabulous movie, so much fun to watch, and not upsetting. And it doesn't, and for once, people are coming up with solutions. I used to get so depressed when people would talk about climate You know what I'm saying? It was
Yes.
all negative and sad and awful. And this is not a negative. This is a positive. And I just feel like we're coming into a new age, and it makes me really happy.
It makes me
But
very
it's
happy too.
It's just complicated. It's like the leave the leaves thing. It's more complicated than you think, but also more simple.
Exactly. And I think
Use your
about
brain.
at the end of my street, it dead ends into two pastures. So it makes it think I'm pretty rural out here. It's not that rural. But
It's not that rural. I've been there, but I know what you're talking about.
those two pastures grow really well, and they have goats that graze out there, and they also have a couple of horses. And I'm like, they need a little herd of sheep out there. That would be awesome.
It'd be fun to watch. It'd be like England for sure. So this idea of regenerative farming and putting back into the land, and one of the reasons grazing animals are important is they scuff up the land.
Yes.
And they poop on it.
And they poop
Those
on
two
it.
things.
And then
Those are the two things that make the difference, because if you don't scuff up the land, then you get that weird algae that grows on it and it forms a crust, which I never had heard that before.
that makes perfect
That's
sense.
a new thing. It does make sense when you listen to them. But one of the things that Will Harris pointed out in the interview I watched him with, he said that that one of the reasons that people find this so complicated is it takes more input from human beings. You have to manage the animals and stuff.
Yes.
So you have to have more people on staff. That doesn't seem like a bad thing to me.
No, and I start to think about Wendell Berry and his writings on agriculture. I mean, we've read his fiction and his, great fiction and everything, but his thoughts on agriculture is mechanization is not always the best way to work the land.
It's not always that way. And so a very interesting, very fun rabbit hole. What are you going to do to fix your garden?
So I'm going to get a herd of sheep out there. I'm just kidding. I wish. We're not allowed to have farm animals in my neighborhood, even though we border up to a pasture, but that's okay. Actually, I'm doing the last of the garden cleanup, I think, because I need to shove all the patio stuff up under a tarp on the patio and button that down and then the perennial beds, I think I'm just going to leave those. I do need to mulch up more leaves, and I put those on top of the vegetable garden beds to help eliminate weeds.
Okay, I want you to stop for a second. That is the single best tip for vegetable gardening, in my opinion.
Adding that crushed leaves on top, mulched leaves on top.
Yes, because it turns into leaf mold. The earthworms pull it down, and it also has bacteria in it that really, really helps plants grow and ward off disease. They just do.
Yes. So anyway, I will be doing that this week because we are going to have some wonderful weather. And you, Dee, what have you planned for the week?
Well, I'm probably going to blow some of my leaves. I'm going to mulch up some of the leaves that are on my very small piece of turf grass that's in my front yard. And then I'm going to do that. And that's it. I'm not doing anything else. I'll be real. Oh, water the plants in the greenhouse and set my timer on my phone on Sundays to water my houseplants.
There you go. Oh, you know what? I still have some geraniums, pelargoniums outside. They're ones with the fancy leaves. I think I'm going to just take those and put them in the garage and see if they make it.
Yeah, if you occasionally water them, they'll probably be fine.
Okay, that's what I'm going to do. And that wraps up our first episode of our 5th season. We want to thank you for listening to The Garden Angelist. I hope you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. We publish every week on Wednesdays at 12 a.m. Eastern Time.
And if you listen to Apple Podcasts, we'd love a 5-star review that helps us get noticed by others. Could you also share our podcast with your friends? Word of mouth is still the best way to get the word out there.
And be sure and check out our show notes for links for more information about today's topics, plus links to our own websites.
And subscribe to our Substack newsletter, The Garden Angelist, at substack.com, also linked to in our show notes.
And if you want to help support us, use those affiliate links. Did I say that already? I don't think I did. If you buy something after clicking through on them, we earn a small commission and it costs you nothing.
It was lovely to chat with all of you over the garden gate. Bye until next week.
Bye, everybody.